Oh, it helps if I turn it on. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for coming. Normally, if we were to hold a conference on climate change and security and the environment, we'd have about maybe 60 people show up. But it does help to have a transition. A lot of people want to know what the hell is going on, and is this a time when things will happen, and what directions are they going to take? So it's a kind of an exciting time. It's a very interesting time. And I don't think there's an issue of that is probably going to be more at the top of the landscape of issues than this one going forward. There has been this groundswell of interest in dealing with global climate change, but we've had the politics get rich, but we've not had the intellectual foundation get strong. And I think that's really where we're at now. And the purpose for this is to try to provide a starting point for some of that. It's the inevitable work that has to be done, because politics can, without a policy framework, is just endless energy, but it doesn't have a sense of direction. And for it to have direction that results in something, it has to be informed by the expertise that comes with knowledgeable people willing to engage in a public discussion about the directions for the country and what they can do about it. So it's very important, and this is going to be a great session today. There are many people that have made this possible. I especially want to welcome back Konrad Lautenbacher. He told me that he has not yet written his speech, but then again, that's because he's no longer in the government, okay? And there's no longer an army out there, or Navy in his case, that was prepared to give him drafts, and so he's now a private citizen again. I'd like to say thank you, Konrad, for everything you did. You just did, when you were in the Navy, you did a spectacular job, and of course at NOAA, I think it's just been exceptional service, and we're all a bit diminished because you have left, but we're very grateful that you did lead in such a remarkable way, and I want to thank you for that. Thank you for coming today, too. We're going to have, our panelists are here. I'm told you're all going to come up here and sit down, so why don't you all move up and sit up here in the front while I'm introducing Ron Sugar. Now, Ron and I go back a long way. He's held up a hell of a lot better than I have. And I'm really very proud that Ron is now, of course, the CEO at Northrop Grumman. We were talking this morning, that I asked Ron, how long have you been CEO? Well, 5.5 years. So, when he first started, the average tenure of a CEO was 7.5 years. He said, but right now the average is 3.5 years. Okay, and so he's already working, 180% over expectation, which has certainly been my experience. He's energetic and driving and creative and enormously committed, that good things happen in the government, and knowing that there's a very positive role that the private sector plays in making good things happen for the government. Much of my personal thinking on this conference stemmed back to a dinner we had several months ago when Ron was talking about the way that, new tools need to be brought to this problem. We've got, as I said, we've got a lot of passion, but we don't necessarily have the new tools. So we talked, and getting a CEO to agree to come to a think tank is hard. I mean, just say because their orbit and their interests have to revolve around the shareholders and shareholder value. But Ron, to his credit, sees a larger purpose and was willing to join us. So Ron, why don't you come up and get us started with our conversation? Thank you all for coming, and welcome Ron Sugar.
Well, thank you, John, and wow, what a terrific turnout this is. I'm honored to be your kickoff speaker, and particularly since I'm not the kind of speaker you might normally expect to be talking about climate or the environment. But this is a good time to hold this event. We're between the recent frenzy of the election and the upcoming inauguration, and it's a good time because the issues discussed today by all of us are going to have to be addressed by the new administration and by the new Congress. In Poznan, Poland, right now, the international community has come together to continue its progress toward a new pact to reduce greenhouse gas emissions Here in the U.S., we're grateful to CSIS, to Dr. Hamry, for keeping the profile of this issue so high and relevant. And this program today, of course, is going to continue that momentum. In President-elect Obama's remarks to a climate change conference of the governors in Los Angeles, which is my hometown, he underlined what we all know, and that is the climate is changing, and those changes will have enormous impacts on our world, on our economies, and on our collective security. Hence, my company's deep interest in this topic. We all know the consequences of doing nothing to prepare for these coming changes. But this morning, I would like to offer some hopeful news associated with climate change. For the next few minutes, I'd like to talk about the core of technical capabilities and expertise that has been developed over many years by the folks in the national security industry, capabilities that could be leveraged and applied to the challenges of climate change. I would also like to touch on the opportunities and societal benefits of doing so, which could be immense. But to realize those benefits, we will have to build something that currently does not exist. We will have to build a bridge between the massive abundant scientific data available now, on the one hand, and the ability to translate that data into practical decision quality knowledge. Let me explain what I mean by this by means of an example. Ship captains of centuries past spent their lives learning to navigate in their local waters. Over years of trial and error, the best of them learned where to find the most favorable winds, where to avoid contrary currents, and other data that made the difference between safety and disaster and between profit and loss on their voyage. Because they and their nations hoarded their hard-won information like treasure, few felt knowledgeable enough to venture out of their own familiar waters. For most of them, ocean navigation was more an oral tradition than a scientific method. And the data points they sought comprised the sum total of understanding they thought available to them. Everything else they believed was unpredictable, and randomness was the natural order of the seas. But there was order in that randomness. Unbeknownst to them, useful information about wind directions and storm patterns was in fact predictable in some sense many years in advance, even in waters in which they never sailed. They knew that the limited information they spent their careers seeking would be useful, but it was the information they were unaware of that would have introduced them to a new world of navigational solutions, capabilities, and unimagined opportunities. I submit to you that it is possible we are in just such a similar state of understanding about climate change. We now record a tremendous amount of Earth monitoring data, from satellites, from sensors on aircraft, on balloons, from sensors deep in the oceans or buried underground. These sensors are found all over the globe. They might belong to any number of nations, and their voluminous data is analyzed by many international scientific institutions. NASA, NOAA, the United States Geological Survey, EPA, the Department of Energy, universities, and others have been performing an incredible service to the progress of climate science by collecting and analyzing this data. And the sensors they operate must be maintained and expanded. The environmental data they have been producing is largely the reason we can even foresee the next evolution of climate understanding, an evolution that must occur if our efforts to create practical mitigation and adaptation options are to be anything more than merely an aspiration. With a few worthy exceptions, that evolution has not yet happened. Why not? I believe it's because we still suffer from an excess of data and a deficiency or a deficit of knowledge. Currently, too much of the data generated by these many sensors are segregated from each other, as are too many of the world's institutions that operate them. And that's not all. For understandable reasons, these data are highly scientific in nature. They are used to feed the many climate models that are so indispensable to the progress of climate science. But these models are complex and the province of scientific and academic communities. For the most part, they produce exactly what they were designed to produce: illustrations of the climate on a global scale and to a generalized timeline. In addition, these models are in their infancy relative to what is yet to come and relative to what is needed for practical purposes. All in all, the veritable ocean of sensor data makes for good science, but its benefits outside that realm are still limited. But what if all that raw environmental data could be turned into practical decision quality knowledge for use by the greater society? What if the products from all these many sensors and information sources could be integrated and consolidated to provide the next evolution of our climate understanding? A level of understanding that could open up a new world of benefits and opportunities that we might not now even imagine. And what if that new understanding of our climate were networked beyond the scientific community to help inform public policy and business decisions at a regional or even local level? This is currently what is being done on a macro level with NOAA's Global Earth Observation Systems of Systems, GEOS. GEOS will eventually integrate the world's Earth observing systems on a global basis and make Earth information universally available for the benefit of society. And as Dr. Hamre mentioned, we are fortunate today to have Admiral Konrad Lautenbacher with us. Connie is the man who more than any other deserves the credit for GEOS. He has been a true visionary in his understanding of the power of integration and knowledge management, and he'll be speaking later to you as well. I do not advocate duplicating the work of GEOS or any other agency or office in the area of data integration, nor do I contend that the private sector could do this all better on its own than the government. I simply contend that it may be well timed to take the next step, to create a higher level structural mechanism under government leadership which builds on our scientific successes to date. What I'm calling for is for the new administration to undertake a national initiative to leverage those investments to provide broad access to decision quality climate knowledge. This is a really hard problem, but the payoff will be enormous, and that's what makes this effort worthy of a national initiative. And finally, I believe that many of the tools and techniques required to do this have already been developed by the defense and information technology industries. Here's the task that calls to us: to tame an ocean of data for practical uses. And here is quite possibly the best opportunity for our nation and our next administration to demonstrate global leadership on the issue of climate change. There are any number of ways that this vision might manifest itself. One may be through the establishment of what we might be calling regional decision support centers. Think of these as information portals, broadly accessible to national, regional, local, and private sector decision makers. One could foresee such centers being staffed with their own analysts and experts, and equipped with their own high-powered computing infrastructure. The professional staffs, the operational processes, even the broadband networks of these centers could be closely interfaced with other federal agencies, state, local, as well as international and public institutions. In this way, these centers could access GEOS and other data and integrate it into useful information relevant to specific problems or a decision that had to be made in a specific region. As I said earlier, I believe many of the tools and technologies have already been developed to attack this problem. They have been developed for national security applications. Let me give you a couple of examples. The astonishing pace of data gathering technology was initially a double-edged sword for our military commanders, offering them unprecedented situational awareness of the battle space on the one hand, but severe information overload on the other, not unlike what we're seeing with the massive scientific climate data. Commanders who needed to forward specific information relative to a unit as small as an infantry squad or a pair of attack jets were required to literally sip water from a fire hose, as they would put it. They had to be able to pull out that tiny thread of relevant information from a mountain of data and get it quickly. What they needed was the ability to access and integrate their data, make sense of it, and share it on a network with their forces. The solution was a combination of computing power and expertise that allowed the different categories of intelligence, whether it was imagery, communications intercepts, or others, to be combined and correlated out of a massive body of data. The breakthrough was the ability of the commander to tailor his information search by time and map coordinates, all the while other commanders in other places were able to do the same thing at the same time for their specific needs. This problem has been a tough nut to crack, and the technologies designed to do it continue to progress and improve. Today, while not perfect, no one does this better than America's military. This quest for the next evolution of climate understanding and for the practical benefits achieving it might induce objections to both its expense and its expanse. First of all, the establishment and operational costs of such regional decision centers, if that's the way we decided to implement this, might cost several $100 million a year. But remember, knowledge, like interest, compounds. Once acquired, knowledge gives an infinite and unforeseen return for the investment. And when government and private sector join in a common effort, each doing what it does best, then a true knowledge base takes root, and the benefits can be astronomical, even if they are frequently unforeseen at first. Placed against that potential, the initial establishment costs would amount to pennies on the dollar. To illustrate this point, let me close with a characteristically American tale of vision, innovation, and resulting dividends. In 1842, an obscure U.S. Navy lieutenant named Matthew Fontaine Maury was placed in charge of the collection of ships' logs dating back to the birth of our Navy. Regulations required that the log of every U.S. Navy ship be sent to Maury's depot after each voyage. Within each log were recorded daily measurements of position, wind velocity and direction, ocean temperature, the speed and the direction of ocean currents, and other data. These dusty, neglected logs would change the world understanding of its oceans, for Maury saw in them a way to turn data into shared knowledge, and in the process to evolve the understanding of our oceans to a higher level. Maury assigned himself the enormous task of integrating all their data into a new type of chart, a chart that predicted wind direction and ocean conditions for any time of the year. He also managed to globalize his data gathering through a set of international recording and reporting standards. Thenceforth, each of the enormous number of ships from the many countries sailing in every ocean became, quote, a temple of science, unquote. Maury's new charts were revolutionary. They allowed ship captains to shave weeks and months from the voyages and helped transform ocean navigation from an art to a science. Here was a new level of understanding that seafarers did not even know was there. And as one grateful captain wrote to him, quote, until I took up your charts, I had been traversing the oceans blindfolded, unquote. In turning data into shared knowledge, Maury invented the discipline of oceanography, and the practical implications were immense. Safer and more efficient sea travel was now available to any captain anywhere in the world who chose to use the new charts. The expenses of ocean commerce, from shipping costs and insurance to the prices of seaborne products and commodities, were all reduced, and the nation's and the world's economies benefited accordingly. Innovation in the service of society is as American a tradition as democracy itself. So too are the benefits that so often spring from the public-private partnership. Lieutenant Maury taught the shipping industry how to work with the oceans. Franklin Roosevelt's rural electrification program transformed the American South, and scores of regional economies blossomed. Kennedy gave us Apollo, and by extension, all the technologies and advances that spun from it. And recently, the Human Genome Project, inspired by a significant government investment, has borne astonishing fruit. Last month, our President-elect made clear his intentions to act. And if our nation's leadership inspires American innovation, it may now be within our power to ensure that our responses to the coming climate changes are not merely reactive, but are proactive. The climate changes that crest the horizon may be beyond our immediate control. How we choose to meet them is not. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Great. We have time for a couple questions if we've got some in the audience. Go ahead, please. And if you could identify yourself, and we'll bring a microphone up too.
Oh, great. Thank you, sir. Brian Bender with the Boston Globe. Secretary Gates writes in a new article in Foreign Affairs that he believes the defense industry, but also the Congress, the Pentagon bureaucracy, remains too wedded to conventional weapon systems. And many of these conventional weapon systems obviously rely on fossil fuels to an enormous extent. I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about the defense industry's perspective on how the U.S. military, which is so reliant on fossil fuels that obviously contribute to global climate change, how the defense industry can begin to help the military build a future force that does not rely on those fossil fuels and is much more climate friendly.
Well, that's a good question. I'm probably not the best expert for that, but I'll make a couple of observations. One is the defense industry's use of fossil fuels is a mere iota of that which is being used. Secondly, we have historical precedents where you have examples of coal-fired ships and a major decision made in 1912, 1913 by the British Navy, correspondingly by our Navy, to move toward oil. It was a big issue, by the way, in Britain because there was a domestic coal industry in Wales that had to be protected, and there was a view that good old Welsh coal was better than relying upon foreign oil. but in fact the British Admiralty, I think it was Winston Churchill actually, saw this as something he had to do, and in fact over time it turned out it was superior technology. Our own Navy, of course, moved to nuclear power, which was very, very important, certainly for certain classes of warships, not necessarily for all. It's a tough problem. The cost of operating with fossil fuels is high. If you think about steaming hours, flying hours, it's an enormous amount of issue. The question is, what are the alternatives, and how do you get alternatives that still give you strategic advantage? It's not clear to me that in the near term there are substantial, significant alternatives to the use of fossil fuels. The United States Air Force has been working with other kinds of fuels, as you know, and has run experiments. At this point in time, I don't see a significant breakthrough. There have been discussions about moving all surface combatants above a certain tonnage to nuclear. That has certain advantages in terms of recurring costs. It has enormous costs in terms of non-recurring costs. So there are no simple solutions to this. I'm not sure I have any magic elixir to offer you.
One in the front there. Here we go.
Yeah, please.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Cheryl Pellerin from the State Department's America.gov website. When you were talking about the regional decision support centers, the tsunami warning centers sprung to mind,
Yeah.
NOAA's warning centers, and I was wondering if you saw the regional decision support centers as international undertaking, and if those are if that's a similar concept.
Yeah, well, certainly. Let me just say that was an example and a notional one, but one could certainly see that tsunami warning centers networked. You could certainly see hurricane centers on our own coastlines as being part of that. I think that the point is that we now have significant amounts of data we never had before. And so the question is, how do you use that in a way which gives you both long-term prediction capability when you decide where to put a bridge or a road, or what do you decide to build on a shoreline, or perhaps nearer-term concern about actual events that might happen this season, this winter. Are we really going to have to worry about stocking up on fuel oil because it's going to be the coldest winter we've ever seen? There's no reason why it couldn't be an international thing. I think it's something that the United States is probably the only country that can take the lead in actually creating, and I think once it gets created, it's sort of like an oyster pearl. You know, you put the grain of sand there, and then eventually, if it's a good thing, it'll become global.
We had one on the other side.
Yeah.
Time for a couple more?
Yeah.
Great.
Dr. Sugar, hi. Jim Wolf, Reuters.
Hi, Jim.
You made the very important points about the huge potential payoff of any such initiative for society and the world. But may I ask you about how Northrop Grumman itself might stand to benefit? CSIS, I believe, has called for doubling the amount the U.S. government spends on Earth observation from about $2.5 billion a year to $5 billion. Is that a potential market for Northrop Grumman, and can you explain how so?
Yeah, Jim, let me just say that the answer is yes. It's something we're interested because it's a place we can contribute, and obviously there's a business opportunity with that, and that's the way our capital system works. If you look at our history, Northrop has been in the business of Earth monitoring, Earth sensing for 5 or 6 decades now, including some of the very earliest satellites that were built for this purpose, and more recently some of the larger, more complex satellites, Aqua, Aura, we're working on InPost now, and others. We're also involved in ground processing. So we do see an opportunity for the company. And more importantly, though, I think we see an opportunity to take a core of expertise and capability that exists within the human talent of the company and apply to this problem. It's not exactly the same as the situational awareness problem of the military. It's not exactly the same as the command and control problem. There's different time constants, different degrees of complexity, different constituents. But even though the words are not exactly the same, it rhymes. And it feels like something that we can actually help work on. And secondly, from a company standpoint, it does involve a security issue. As we've said, that the climate change and the impacts of climate change are, in fact, an underlying security issue for the nation and the world. And that's sort of what we have to be concerned about. So if you think about the way we approach our marketplace, Jim, we think about a global security in its broadest context, and where can we take skills that we have and apply them there. And that's why we have a lot of interest in this problem.
Just as a follow-up, can you put a number on how much of the revenues are now derived, or how much revenue Northrop Grumman currently derives from this deal, which you might hope to do?
Gosh, I don't have a number at the tip of my fingers. Probably a few percent today. It could grow of the revenues. Yeah, a few percent. Yeah, perhaps. and of civil-related work. I wouldn't say it's all climate, and could certainly grow. I think it all depends upon the need. And I think there is a need here. I think that we're looking at something which is really hard. This is a hard problem, but it's not necessarily any harder than the Manhattan Project was, or the ICM project, ICBM, or the Apollo project. And the question is, do we think as a nation there's a payoff here, and should there be an initiative? If there is, it's a hard problem. We ought to put our smart people to work on it. We ought to fund it. There ought to be a policy, and there ought to be some continuity of interest.
And for those of you in the back, there's a few seats up in the front. This isn't like church, and we won't ask you to sing or anything. So, if there are no more questions, one more. Can we get time? One more, and then that's it.
Nancy Colleton with the Alliance for Earth Observations. Could you please describe how NPOS fits into the vision that you discussed with us this morning?
Well, NPOS is certainly an extraordinarily important element of that. It is one of a whole number of orbiting sensors, and of course there's more than just orbiting sensors. This will be a very, very capable machine with multiple sensors and the ability to do a whole bunch of observations. This will gather a substantial body of additional knowledge, additional information. It'll have a lot of benefit for weather, for climate monitoring. It'll be valuable for the Department of Commerce, obviously. That's why NOAA has been the lead of this thing. It's commercially important. It'll be important for scientific reasons, which is one of the reasons NASA is involved. And, oh, by the way, it'll be very important for our military, and that's why the Air Force is involved. So, important program and something that I think the nation is going to be very happy to have as we get this thing orbiting in the next few years. Okay? All right. Thank you all.